Crystal Wade here with Hope Streams, and we're continuing our message on grace. And we are still in the scripture in Hebrews, and it is Hebrews 12:15, looking diligently, lest any man fail of the grace of God, lest any root of bitterness spring up trouble you, and thereby many be defiled. So we had covered what it is and looks like to fail of the grace of God in a day. And the second part of that is when we do, come up late and miss the grace of God in a day, it gives opening for a root of bitterness to spring up. Now, a root of bitterness and bitterness itself, those are blockers to grace. And since everything that we have, that we receive from the Father, is by grace through faith, and since His grace makes our life, it's a divine power that is a spiritual condition of goodness in our lives, we don't want to do anything to block His grace. And we don't inadvertently want to be the cause of our prayer for His glory being poured out to be stopped. Okay, so the bitterness. First, let me talk about this, okay? Well, let me back up here. So, missing the grace of God in a day can cause a root of bitterness to spring up. One cause of bitterness is overworking. You can work yourself so hard that you hurt and you feel bad, and that causes you to become bitter. So this sounds easy. Hopefully this is easy. Okay, the answer is easy. So grace of God to do it. Stop working. You're hurting. You can, if you absolutely have to finish that in the moment, then you come and you ask for the sufficiency of His grace to cover your weakness there, that you can complete it. And then you need to stop. And if you are praying that and you're still hurting, just stop, because your soul and your body need a rest. And if you get one, you can avoid that bitterness. All right, bitterness puts you at risk of witchcraft. And witchcraft ruins a lot of stuff. I'm not going to say it ruins your life, but it could. It could. It will do nothing good, and it will cause you a lot of trouble. So you don't want it. Simon, that Peter confronted in Acts 8:23, he had the gall of bitterness. So Simon was in the magic arts and sorcery and witchcraft, and it was riding in on a gall of bitterness and in bondage of unrightness. Bitterness is a blockage to grace. Grace's foundation is in the rightness of Christ. So all of the foundations here for grace and the glory of God to flow in a life were completely stopped in Simon's life. Okay? Now, a lot of who we are is developed in the early years in our life, in our family. Okay? So in our family, for instance, when the parents are overworking, and this has happened in my life, and they may be doing it to survive, or they may be doing it because they are in patterns that they don't know any different, then they're hurting, and they can overreact on their children, and they injure their children, and their children end up with a root of bitterness. Okay? So if any man fail of the grace of God, lest any root of bitterness spring up and trouble you and defile many. So our overworking and our bitterness can infect our children through our responses. And a root of bitterness, once it is full grown, can lead to bad stuff like witchcraft and worse. And it just keeps going. It defiles many, okay? So it behooves us to learn how to flow in the grace of God. There are 7 levels of bitterness, and Pastor Henry Wright, let me see this here, a more excellent way. Pastor Henry Wright, he pioneered the spiritual roots to physical disease. And he talks about the 7 levels of bitterness, and a lot of healings that he see happen when people deal with these. Okay, so I want to let you know what these 7 levels of bitterness are. It starts with unforgiveness, and then it goes to resentment, and then retaliation, then anger, hatred, violence, and murder. It is on a spectrum. And remember what Jesus said. He said, he went from the law being all these things that you had to follow outwardly to, the royal law of love and what you're thinking inwardly. And he said, if any man hate his brother, it's as murder. So he's talking about it being in the spectrum, and it's the intent of the heart. And it's important, how we are receiving the grace of God for ourselves, and then responding in our families, that we pass on the grace of God that is so wonderful, so full of goodness, and that Christ paid so much for, and not bitterness because we're coming up late and tardy and we're missing what he's doing in our lives for joy and goodness in that day. And the closer that you live with people, like for instance in a family, we step on each other's toes and hurt each other's feelings, and anger, happens. And so it's so important to clear out that anger every day. Ephesians 4:26 says, in your anger, don't sin. So the Father's not saying don't be angry, but he's saying don't sin in it and clear it out before the sun goes down. Because if we don't, then we are giving the devil a foothold. And let me just tell you, once that devil has a foothold, he's going to bang the door down. So unforgiveness can go, and depending on if it's just based on that day, or it's based on, a root of bitterness in your family line, things can go from bad to worse really fast. It's actually bitterness and jealousy are the 2 biggest causes of trouble between brothers and sisters in families, children growing up. So we need to recognize that and clean that out in prayer and confession daily, parents. All right, I want to share this with you. This is the daily cleanser off of our website, Hope Streams, and it is praying cleansing for us daily. But one of its benefits is to help release the pain that causes unforgiveness to hang on. And that is the foundation of bitterness. So I just want to share that resource with you. And we will be continuing on to other blockages and then stewardship of grace.